Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us Dr. C Rangarajan, Chairman of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, who will explain to us the shivers that the world is, especially emerging economies, are facing because the Fed Reserve's stated policy direction that some of the liquidity that America has been pumping all these years might be withdrawn sometime in the near future. Welcome to our show, Dr. Rangarajan.
Thank you.
It seemed that the Indian economy was coming back on the rails in the last few months. Inflation was trending down. There was hope that government was taking some policy decisions to boost investments. In the middle of all this, sir, we saw this unforeseen event in the form of Ben Bernanke declaring that some of the big liquidity surge that the US Fed Reserve had executed over the last 4 years might be slowly be withdrawn. Now, it has had a huge impact on many emerging economies, including India. Our rupee has gone for a rapid depreciation, about 8%. So have other countries' currencies too. So, what is going on, and where is this leading us?
Well, I think the market reacted very strongly. One could even call it a knee-jerk reaction. The statement made by the Fed chairman has been interpreted in a particular way, which resulted in a sudden shock to the currency markets, not only in India but elsewhere. But what the Fed chairman said is something very natural, because the United States could not have gone on forever with a quantitative easing program. It has to come to a stop at some particular time.
There has to be an exit sometime.
Yes, and he was also very careful, and he did not say that the quantitative easing would stop in the next month or the following month. He said as the US economy improves, the quantitative easing will have to taper off. So it is something 6 months away or 1 year away, but the markets reacted very strongly, and it did affect the Indian rupee a little more strongly than elsewhere, because we had a high level of current account deficit, and therefore we needed on capital flows to cover the current account deficit, and the rupee came under pressure because of the mismatch between the current account deficit and the capital flows. And therefore I expect that as the markets recover and as the quantitative easing continues to remain in position, perhaps there will be a reversal of whatever we have seen in the last 4 or 5 days, and the capital flows may also resume as far as India is concerned, and bringing about greater stability in the value of the rupee.
So, what in your view might have prompted Bernanke to choose the timing of this statement? Because as you said, there are no signs of the US economy having recovered or in any significant way. Now, it could take, as you said, could take 6 months, it could take 1 year. US unemployment levels are still high. So, what was he trying to indicate? What's your reading?
Well, it has been talked about that, namely that how far and how long the US Fed can go on with this particular policy. I think it was more like a philosophical statement rather than an active policy decision. What he was only expressing was that at some particular point, this program of easing will have to stop, because the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve System has exploded.
And I guess it's gone up 3 times in the last
3 or 4 times almost
in the last 4 years.
And eventually, when interest rates begin to rise, there will be a balance sheet problem for the Central Bank of the United States, because the value of all these assets will go down, and the government may have to come in to save the Federal Reserve System also. There will be a fiscal problem at that particular point. But I think, again, he was talking in general about the direction in which the monetary policy should be moving eventually in the United States. I don't think he thought of any particular time as appropriate. He just expressed an opinion, and then it gave
So
a
the
shock
world
to
markets reacted to that opinion.
yeah, and it gave a shock. I mean, whether the market should react in this particular way is a big question.
It's a big question.
I think we earlier we used to talk about the expression irrational exuberance. Now this is the opposite of exuberance, but it is nevertheless irrational.
So do you think that the world markets, in some sense, because of the backdrop, 4 or 5 years of so much quantitative easing, not only by the US, by Euro, Eurozone, UK, do you think we are in a situation where finance capital is in some ways creating this this fear, irrational fear, as it were? Will this fear keep recurring from time to time, or are we going to see some stability?
Well, this is a sudden reaction to a particular statement. The currency markets do fluctuate, but they never do as violently as they have done in the last 4 or 5 days. But we need to expect the currency market to be moving up and down.
Sure.
Therefore, ultimately, the stability in the various markets will come only as the economies
The real
pick
economy
up.
recovers.
The recovery of the real economy is the crux of the problem.
Yeah.
I think the United States has shown some element of recovery.
Some impulse.
And I think 2013 will be reasonably good year for the United States. They are now, their GDP now is higher than what it was in 2008. This is not so in Europe. But in the US particularly, they have compensated the loss that occurred in 2008 and following. Therefore, their GDP is improving. Therefore, as the world economy improves, I believe there can be stability in the various markets.
Sir, I'll tell you why I'm asking this question particularly in regard to fear caused by this withdrawal from quantitative easing, because I saw a piece of data, statistic, which tells me that if you take the US, Eurozone and Japan and UK together, their central banks have balance sheets have expanded from roughly $3 trillion in 2008 to what, $9 trillion. Now that's huge. Now, therefore, at some point of time or the other, as you yourselves say, we have to expect that such huge easing has to be withdrawn. Now, what sort of impact this withdrawing of liquidity by these big central banks of developed countries could have on emerging economies is what my worry is. So, how do you see?
To some extent, the capital flows will be affected. Let us see under what circumstances this quantitative easing can come to an end, or can be tapered off, or will taper off. One, there is a recovery in the world economy,
Yeah, sure.
Particularly in the developed world. Now, if there is a recovery in the developed world, that would be beneficial to the rest of the world too. And therefore, from the trade point of view, certainly the recovery of the economy will.
So, you're saying the real economy growth can counter the withdrawal of quantitative easing?
The adverse impact of the tapering of the quantitative easing will to some extent be compensated by the improvement in the real economy, and therefore their beneficial impact upon the developing economies. Secondly, on the withdrawal of quantitative easing will have some impact on capital flows, because some part of the liquidity that has been injected into the system in those countries has also leaked out, and that is how the emerging markets have benefited. Now, I believe that at that particular stage, when the recovery has happened, the capital flows will be determined by fundamental factors, the level of savings and the appropriate investment destinations.
So, you think as long as the fundamentals are good, we could still ride through this.
Right. I believe in that particular context, as far as India is concerned, we will have a growth of 6% plus in the current fiscal.
So we'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. C Rangarajan, Chairman of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Sir, you were talking about how the withdrawal or the stated intent of withdrawal of quantitative easing by America and by other developed countries' central banks can be handled well if emerging economies like India get their fundamentals right of their economy. And for that, I presume we'll have to get our growth back to, as you said, 6.5%. And we also, I presume, need to get our current account deficit to a normal long-term average of about 2%. Would you say that?
Well, the developing economies must ensure that their growth rate is reasonable and adequate to attract investors. And in this particular context, I believe India's long-term potential is certainly very high. And therefore, we should get back to the high rate of growth which we had seen some years ago as quickly as possible. But as far as the current fiscal is concerned, I think that the growth rate will be in excess of 6%. Okay. All efforts must be made to reach that, and I am confident we will do it. Therefore, as far as the current account deficit is concerned, it remains high. In the present fiscal, I believe the overall current account deficit in absolute terms may be higher than last year, but as a proportion of GDP may be lower than last year. Nevertheless, it is high.
So you expect about 4.5%?
About 4.6, 4.7% of the GDP. But we really need to bring it down because it makes the economy certainly vulnerable to external factors. We had estimated, and many others have also done, 2.5% of the GDP is probably the level at which the current account deficit should stay.
Yeah. So is it consistent with, say, 7.5% growth, 2.5% current account deficit in normal circumstances?
Well, yes. I mean, it is appropriate to anywhere around 7 to 8% rate of growth of the economy. But the level of current account deficit is also related to the ability to finance the current account deficit. I mean, therefore, in some sense, some of the developed countries, including the richest country, the United States, was able to incur a very, very high level of current account deficit, but it ignored it because it could finance it, and the dollar was always considered a safe currency, and money was flowing
because it's their dollar, so they could print it.
But as far as India is concerned, we can't do it. Therefore, it is related not only to the level of growth, but also to the level which will be comfortable as far as the country is concerned in terms of financing the deficit. Okay. So we really need to get back to somewhere around 2.5% of the GDP. But that will require effort on both on the side of exports and on the side of imports.
Imports, yeah. And sir, particularly on the side of exports, because if exports don't pick up, then even if we get a GDP growth of, suppose we get a GDP growth of 6.5%, with exports not really picking up significantly, then there's a possibility that the current account deficit may even widen, because as growth picks up, our imports would increase, right? So
yeah, to some extent, the current account deficit of India is also due to the disparate rates at which our country is growing and the rest of the world, particularly the developed world, is growing. So the developed world is growing at less than 2%, whereas we are growing at least about 6%. Therefore, our imports keeps increasing, but our exports do not expand to the same extent
because the developed world demand is down.
Their growth rate is down, and therefore the demand is down.
So could this create a structural problem?
Yeah, there is a structural problem, but we only hope that as the developed economies come out of the current phase and start improving, then it will also be the occasion when we will be able to correct our current account deficit more conveniently.
Okay.
But it also shows that the trade relationship must also shift, because if the growth is happening to a larger extent outside the developed world or the originally defined developed world, and it is happening only in the emerging economies, then we really need to look very carefully how to divert our trade in towards those countries which are having
demand is on the increase,
which are having a higher growth, and therefore whose demand for our commodities will be higher.
Sure. So we'll come back to this, but after a small break, please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. C Rangarajan, Chairman of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So you very rightly said that there is a structural issue whereby India needs to increase its exports, and the developed economies are not yet showing enough signs of absorbing that demand from India. So we need to diversify our exports. Now, coming back to the domestic economy, sir, what are the key impetus that we require today? I mean, as you said earlier in some of our earlier interviews, you said there was a need to put in place pipeline investments very fast so that the incremental capital output ratio reverts to the normal levels that you had been mentioning about. Now, is that happening? Are investments in the pipeline, are the hurdles to those investments being removed fast enough, according to you?
The Cabinet Committee on Investments has been looking at some of the major projects, and I believe it has helped to clear a fairly reasonable number of projects. But the obstacles or the clearances that are needed are many, and it has to be a continuous process.
Yeah.
And it has to be done not only at the level of the Cabinet Committee, which is at the highest policy making level, but also at the lower levels in order to ensure that the projects get completed. I believe, as we talked last time, there are 3 or 4 key areas which lie in the public domain, which are like coal, power, roads and railways.
Sure.
Where the completion of projects, the execution of projects can be speeded up. And the Finance Minister has very clearly indicated very recently that the budgeted government expenditures will be incurred during this year. And therefore, if in these 4 areas there is greater activity, and if we can achieve the production as well as the capacity creation targets in these 4 sectors, this itself will act as a great stimulus for private investment and economic activity. I see the activization of public investment as a stimulus for increased economic activity in the country at the moment.
And so, what is the private investment rate at the moment, as per your data that you might have seen latest in this fiscal?
Well, I don't think the problem which we had indicated earlier is not so much with the level of investment, as much with the output flowing out of the investments.
Okay.
I think even according to the latest national income statistics, the investment or the savings level is still remaining at around 30% of the GDP,
Okay.
which is still a very high level of savings and investment, which should give us comfortably 7 to 8% rate of growth in the normal circumstances.
But you're saying it's not translating into output?
It is not translating into output either because the complementary investments are not happening, or because the output is not increasing adequately in one sector to support another sector, which is the classic example of the link between coal and power. So unless the coal industry the production improves, the power sector capacity creation will go to waste.
Yeah.
Therefore, there is a close link. In fact, as far as coal is concerned, if we can really put all our efforts to improve the production, it will have a good effect not only in terms of the domestic economy, but also in terms of the current account deficit, because our imports of coal have
very high.
increased quite
has doubled in the last 4 years,
quite
right?
substantially, and therefore it is almost about $18 billion now.
And it used to be about 8 billion, 7,
it
8
is
billion
only at
dollars.
about 9 billion a few years ago. Therefore, the improvement in the coal sector, I believe that actions have been taken, and we have seen improvement last year in the coal production.
And so what is the rate at which coal production is going up? You told me last time that there's an improvement in the rate of growth in coal production.
Yes, I think that there has been the year before and all that. There was almost stagnant coal production.
That was 0% growth.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I think it is about 3 to 4% or something like that. That is happening. So I think we probably need to increase even further. And there is, of course, all related issues like transportation. There is no point in coal accumulating at the pit head. So there are other related issues also that need to be addressed. But this is in the short term. Over the medium term, we need to address many other issues as far as coal production is concerned.
Okay. Other issues like?
Other issues like environmental and other things, because the lot of coal reserves that we now have are hidden in deep forest areas.
Okay.
Now we have to make up our minds whether what is priority. Now we can't sacrifice environmental concerns, but at the same time, if you have to increase the coal production, some compromise will have to be made.
Yeah.
So some choice or some decision will have to be made where it can be done and how it can be done or how it should be done.
And so one problem that I see in our political economy particularly is that oil prices gets politicized. To some extent we have succeeded in depoliticizing it because diesel prices are getting automatically aligned to market levels. But coal is still politicized with all kinds of, all these cases going on against coal allocations, etc., private sector. Gas is still politicized because the left parties yesterday had a press conference saying that we have to supply gas to fertilizers and to power sector at subsidized rates. So do you think some of these issues will get resolved once general elections happen and new government is in place, and this sort of contests in the political setup also reduces?
No, we need to move in phases. For example, even in the case of petroleum pricing, it took some time before we could move on to a situation in which at least the major petroleum products could be market determined. Therefore, in all the other areas also, we need to take a few more steps forward in the direction of fixing the prices at market levels.
Okay.
Now, it is not as if that if gas price is increased, then automatically the other prices must go up. Now, you can do it in phases, adjust it and so on. But unless the natural resources are adequately priced, there will be no incentive also to produce more. Therefore, it is a compromise. But I think we should have a clear idea of where we are going. Then we can indicate what time it will take to reach that particular point.
And in some ways, a lot of these issues, coal, as you said, even gas, oil, they are all linked to the current account deficit because energy is by far our biggest chunk of imports, right?
Yes.
So unless we address this, our current account vulnerability will also remain.
I think it's very important that we address this issue, and over the medium term, our dependence on energy imports will have to come down. I mean, as a proportion of GDP, and therefore, I think action is required, and we should be able to attract investors to it. At the same time, one does not overlook the fact that there are consumers and consuming industries, which also need to adjust.
You think they can be ring-fenced through separate subsidy regime directly paid by the government?
No, they cannot be ring-fenced totally. I mean, I think then the subsidy burden will increase enormously. Therefore, you are shifting the responsibility from one thing to another. Therefore, the fiscal deficit will become an issue at that time. Okay. But as I said, a phased manner in which we should be able to do it as we did in the petroleum products.
Thank you very much for talking to us. So that was Dr. Rangarajan talking to Rajya Sabha TV. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back soon next week. Thank you.